how to configure Selenium in Jenkins. If you've ever had to write automated tests for web applications, you've probably run across Selenium. But have you ever created a Selenium project from scratch? That's what we're going to do in this video. Here's today's starting point. I have a Jenkins LTS controller version 2.319.2. And attached to this controller, I have a Linux-based agent with both Google Chrome and Firefox installed. So as I said, we're going to be starting a project from scratch. So I'm going to go over to my command line, and I'm in my GitHub directory. So I don't have a GitHub repository as of yet. By the time we get to the end of the video, you'll see the final repository out on GitHub. So first off, let's go ahead and create our repository. I'm going to give it the name of Jenkins Example Selenium Tests, and I'm going to allow it to create a gitignore file for me based on Maven. It's going to be a public repository, and I'm going to go ahead and clone it down locally. So let's go ahead and run this. So now my repository has been created and it's now been cloned into my directory. Next up, we're going to be using Maven. So I'm going to generate a Maven project using an archetype, and I'll paste it in here. What I'm saying here is I'm going to create the group ID to be com planet pope selenium tests. The artifact ID is going to be the name of the directory that was just created for us, which is Jenkins Example Selenium Test. The archetype artifact ID is just Maven archetype quick start. So we're just doing a very basic one. We give it a version and we're marking the interactive mode as false. So let's go ahead and run this. And now that this is completed, let's go ahead and go into the directory. So Jenkins Example Selenium. And one more thing we're going to do in this directory is we're going to go ahead and install the Maven wrapper. So let me go ahead and grab that command, and I'm going to be specifying Maven 3.8.4. So we'll have the Maven wrapper within our project. And now that's done. And just to make sure everything looks okay inside of VS Code, we'll go ahead and open up VS Code. We'll drag this back over here. Let's zoom in just a little bit. So we have our Maven wrapper, we have our gitignore, we have some source files, we have some test files from the archetype. So the basics of our project are getting into place. Now let's go back over to our shell and let's go ahead and run Maven W clean test. We're just making sure that everything is working as expected up to this point. Most of this work is throwaway, but it's going to help us out in the end. So it compiled, the test ran from the code that was generated from the archetype. That's all fine. So at this point, the project is looking good from a Maven perspective, from a VS Code perspective, and from a GitHub perspective. Now let's go back over to our browser and let's take a look at the documentation for Selenium WebDriver. Now we're not going to be going through Selenium Grid today, just Selenium WebDriver. And for Selenium WebDriver, under Getting Started, it takes us through a handful of different steps that we need to do. First off, we'll need to install a Selenium library. We'll need to install browser drivers. And then we go through a couple of examples for opening and closing a browser and writing our first script. Let's go ahead and click on Install Library. And since we are going to be using Java as our language, and what we see is that we are going to need to add a dependency to our POM XML. Now, we're not going to do that just yet, but just understand that we need to install Selenium-Java as a dependency. And now let's go ahead and click on Install Drivers. And just for reference, the drivers that are allowed on Linux are both for Chrome and for Firefox. So if I wanted to test Edge or Internet Explorer or Safari, I would need to either have Windows or Mac OS. In my simple example today, I'm just using Linux, so the only two browsers that we're going to be using are Chrome and Firefox. Now there are three different ways to use the drivers. There's driver management software, there is a path environment variable, or there is a hard-coded location. For our example today, we are going to be using the driver management software, specifically WebDriver Manager. Let's go ahead and open up WebDriver Manager. That's going to take us over to GitHub, which is useful if you wanted to dig into it, but really I want to go over to the documentation. So as we take a look at the documentation here, what we're going to see on the left-hand side is the setup. And again, much like what we saw in setting up Selenium Java, and we need to add a dependency, we're going to need to add a dependency for WebDriver Manager. However, much like before, we're not going to add the dependency just yet, but we're really close because there are examples that we can use to base our POM XML off of. And the one that we're going to use in this video is WebDriver Manager Basic. So take us back over to GitHub and let's click into POM XML. Now let's go ahead and take a look at all the different things that we're going to need to do. What we're going to do is we are going to take the full dependency block from this POM XML. You'll also notice that there are properties here that we're going to have to add in. So we're going to start with this. So let's go back over to VS Code. We'll click on POM XML. Let's go down into our dependency, which there's only one at this point. So we'll get rid of that. So now all of that is set up to look like the example. So we'll push this in one more space. Okay. Now looking at all of these different versions, we'll just go ahead and go back over and grab those from here. So I'm going to grab SLF4J. Whoops, went too far. We're going to grab SLF4J, logback. We'll grab the JUnit version. Now you'll notice that we're using JUnit 5. Assert J, Selenium Java, and WDM, which is WebDriver Manager. I'm also going to go ahead and copy over Maven Surefire plugin, and I'm going to go ahead and copy the Java version and the Java compiler because if you'll notice, the two Maven compilers are referencing Java version. Now in this video, we're going to be using Java version 11, not 1.8. So I'm just going to copy this whole block. I'm going to go back over to my code and go up into the properties section. I'll leave this first one, but I'm going to get rid of these two because they're going to be coming back in from what I'm copying. And we're just going to stick with the versions that are currently in WebDriver example here because these are not necessarily the most recent, but they're recent enough for this example. So these cover all of the properties that we have down here except for the Maven Surefire plugin. I'm going to copy this and I'm going to go down to Maven Surefire, which is right here. Let's go ahead and replace that static value with the property. And now I'm going to say, yep, sure, always. So all the values are there. This needs to change to 11 for my Java version. That looks good. So at this point, we're close. We're really close to actually getting started with Selenium. Now you may have noticed that we have a dependency on SLF4J and on logback. So the WebDriver Manager has a dependency for logback, otherwise the logging doesn't work. So let's go ahead and go into source main. I'm going to create a new folder called resources. And inside of this folder, I'm going to create my logback.xml. And let's go back over and just copy the logback that is within source main resources. And let's go ahead and get rid of this Java folder and all of its children just because we're not going to need it. So we'll move that to trash. And then I'm also going to go ahead and delete app test Java because we're going to create our first test file in just a moment. So just to go ahead and test this out, I'm going to copy one of the example tests that we have here inside of basic. So we'll say source test, Chrome test. I'm going to go to raw just to copy it over. We'll go back over here. And we're just wanting to do this just to see if everything works as expected. So I'll go here, new file, and I am going to call this Chrome tests.java. And I probably need to refactor this just a little bit, and that's okay if I do. Let's get rid of his package here. We'll leave the license in. We're actually not going to commit this. We're just testing this out to see how it works. Okay, we'll do that. Chrome test. It's plural, so we'll make that tests. There we go. And let's go back over to our shell and let's run this. So we're going to say /maven w clean test. That way we're using the Maven wrapper. Let's see what happens here. Now our test ran fine, but you may have noticed a browser popped up when that test ran. That's not really what we want. We're going to want to run our jobs in a headless fashion. So let's go ahead and go back over to Chrome tests. I'll go ahead and just delete this because we're not going to use it, but we have proven that the job actually runs and the test does successfully pass. So up to this point, we know that step by step, little by little, we've added each piece in, so we're able to verify at this point that everything is working the way we expect. So let's go ahead and delete this file, and let's head back over to our documentation for WebDriver Manager. We'll go right here, and let's click on Open Browser. Now this just talks about how to open a browser. It's reviewing options. That's where we'll specify our headless option. And it goes through each of these for Chrome, Edge, and the other browser types. But now let's go ahead and go over and create our own test. So we'll go back into VS Code. Under Selenium test, we're going to say new file. And this new file is going to be called Jenkins homepage test.java. And I'm going to paste in the code, and then we'll take a look at it. And what we have here is a Jenkins homepage test. We specify the driver. Before all, the WebDriver Manager starts up a Chrome driver and sets it all up, so that gets our driver ready to go. This does not install the Chrome browser. The browser has already been installed, but we need a driver to drive the browser. And that's what WebDriver Manager is doing for us. It's downloading the necessary code to connect with the browser and drive the browser. And then before each test, and right now we only have one test, we're going to set it up. We're going to pass in a headless option, and then we're going to assign that option to the driver. And then in the teardown, if the driver isn't null, so in the case that we have a problem, this isn't going to null pointer on us. So if the driver isn't null, we're going to go ahead and stop the driver. And then finally, for our test, is a really simple test. We're going to do a get on jenkins.io, and we're going to assert that Jenkins is the title of the page that has been returned. So let's go ahead and go back over to our command line, and let's run this test. So we'll go ahead and clear this out, and let's run this test and understand what is happening here. Now I promise we're going to be getting to Jenkins in just a few moments. But what we can see here is the test ran fine. No failures, no errors, nothing skipped. And let's take a look at what it did. We can see that the driver, Chrome driver, was found in cache. Then it exported that so Maven knew how to use it. We start the driver, it loads the page, and then finally it closes down. So again, nothing real exciting yet, but we're able to see that we're able to download the page, pull the title out, verify the title, and then we shut down. Very basic test to begin with. So now at this point, let's go ahead and create a Jenkinsfile and commit this repository up to GitHub so we can set up our Jenkins job. So let's go back over to VS Code. In the root of the project, let's do that here. Let's create a new file, call it Jenkinsfile. And it's going to be pipeline agent any, since I only have one agent set up. Stages, stage. My first stage is going to be verify browsers are installed. Because if the browsers aren't installed, then running the tests won't help us any. So for my steps, I am going to do an sh Google Chrome, because I'm using Google Chrome and not Chromium, -- version. And then for Firefox, it's just Firefox -- version. So that's the first stage. The second stage is what we've been running. Let's just type a stage name of run tests. Whoops. Steps. And then for this, I'm going to do /maven w clean test. So again, much like everything we've done up to this point, nothing seems earth-shattering. It's all fairly simple because it should be simple. The real work that we would be doing would be within our test files. Creating the project, getting it wired up correctly, having the Jenkins file, and getting ready to create the job all should be simple and straightforward. Let's go ahead and save this. Let's go over here and check out what we need to commit. So we've got our test, our logback, settings.json. I don't want to commit my VS Code file, so let's go back over to my gitignore, and let's go ahead and exclude that. So I'll say .vscode/. So the VS Code directory doesn't get committed. We'll go back over here, check it out one more time. So gitignore, Jenkinsfile, Maven W, Maven W command, POM XML, Maven wrapper properties, Maven wrapper downloader. Again, all of those are good. And in fact, the Maven gitignore that was provided to us through the GitHub creation already ignores some files out of the .maven directory, including a wrapper jar that does exist in my local directory, but I don't want it to go up. So I'm just going to stick with this, my logback and my test file. So I've got 9 files that are going to be committed up to GitHub. And you know what I didn't do? I clicked the wrong button. There we go. So now we have all of our files staged. And I'm going to call this initial commit, even though it's not really the initial commit. We'll click on sync changes. And now everything that we need in order to run this within Jenkins has been committed to the repository. So let's go ahead and go back over to Jenkins and let's create our job. It's a new item. I'm going to call this Selenium pipeline. Click OK. Pipeline script from SEM. Git. The repository URL is that URL. The branch specifier is main. And the script path is Jenkinsfile. So everything looks pretty good here. Let's click on save. And then let's click on build now. And we'll fast forward through this, and then we'll review it after it's complete. So let's go ahead and scroll up and take a look at what happened when we ran the job. So what we have here is our version of Google Chrome is 9.7. Our version of Firefox is 91.5. So at this point, we know we have both of those browsers on our agent. So it's a good sanity check to make sure those exist before we actually run our job. When we run our Maven W clean test, what we're going to see here as we go through it, we get down into the test. We see we're detecting the Chrome version using online commands.properties, running command on the shell, Google Chrome version. So it's even within Google Chrome driver, it's checking the same thing that we just did. We run our job, make sure it's all good. It checks the driver. We have one test, our test passed, and it's all good. But at this point, we have only created a test for Chrome. What if I also wanted to create the same test for Firefox? Well, that's simple. We just need to write a Firefox test. However, what we don't want to do, at least in our example, is we don't want to just copy and paste over this whole file for Jenkins homepage test and create a Firefox version of the whole page. Because if we take a look at it, everything would be basically the exact same thing except where we'd specify Chrome driver would now become Firefox driver. This Chrome driver would become Firefox driver. But we don't want to duplicate our teardown and our test because we want the test to be here. Because if you think about it, I want numerous tests to be able to be created and to be run across multiple different browsers. So how am I going to do that? Now, this is my example. This does not necessarily mean that this is the best way to do it, but this is the way that I'm going to do it for this example. So let's go ahead and go back over to here. I'm going to create a new folder called Chrome, a new folder called Firefox, and finally, probably a very poorly named, abstracts. And you probably see where this is going. What I'm going to do is I am going to go ahead and move this into abstracts for the moment. And that is okay. I'm also going to go ahead and make a copy of this and put it into Chrome. So we'll just leave that there as it is for the moment. We'll do a cleanup here. In fact, let's go ahead and do the cleanup on the Chrome one first. So that's not abstracts, that one is Chrome. Now we've already said that we don't want to copy around everything in the browser-specific test. So let's go ahead and get rid of WebDriver because we'll be able to access that from our abstract. The before all we need to keep here because this is Chrome specific. The setup test is Chrome specific. The teardown is not. And the test is not. Okay. Now we can see here that it's complaining about driver. So let's go ahead and go up to our abstract. We're going to make a couple of small changes here before we get started. First off, I'm going to name it abstract Jenkins homepage, and I'm going to remove test. Okay. And then I'm going to need to do the same thing here on the name. Oh, hey, it actually already went ahead and did the change for me. So that one's fine. Now what I need to do is get rid of anything that is specific to Chrome. So I'm going to get rid of this one and get rid of this one. But what I see here, let's go and get rid of the bad imports now. Okay. But what I see here is WebDriver is still under this scope. And I cannot access this driver from within the actual concrete example. Let's go ahead and extend abstract Jenkins homepage. Whoops. And let's go ahead and do a quick fix on that, and we'll import that. Again, we still can't see driver. Now again, this is my example. Don't take this as a best practice, but I'm going to make this public. At least from there, I'm able to see driver now and actually do the things that I need to do. Let's also go ahead and clean up these imports. So now we have our Chrome setup ready to go. And in fact, let's go ahead and run it locally and see what happens. So let's run this again for clean test. And if everything works as expected, it should be exactly the same output as what we saw from the previous run, and it is. So let's go ahead and go back over, and let's create a Firefox version of the Chrome test. So we'll click and copy down Jenkins homepage test into Firefox. Let's go ahead and fix the package. And let's change Firefox driver, or change Chrome driver to Firefox driver. Let's change these Chrome options to Firefox options. And we'll need to import that. And I need to change Chrome driver to Firefox driver. Now, fortunately for us, the options are exactly the same. Headless, -- headless is the same for both Chrome and for Firefox. So from that point, we're good. Let's go ahead and import this one. And let's go ahead and get rid of these bad imports. So now what we have is a test that is going to be using the Firefox browser through the Firefox driver. So just for a quick sanity check before we commit it and push it up, let's run our clean test again. And this time, instead of seeing just one, we should see two. So right now it's running the Firefox version. Now it's running the Chrome version. So we had 2 test runs, no failures, no errors, nothing skipped. So at this point, we know our Chrome test passes and our Firefox test passes. So let's go ahead and flip back over to VS Code. We can see that we have some changes here. We'll just go ahead and commit it all. We're adding in the abstract, and then we have our 2 specific versions, one for Chrome and one for Firefox. So that's good. So let's add Firefox as our message. We'll sync the changes. And let's go back over to our controller, and let's go ahead and run this job one more time. And what we can see here from the final output is that both tests ran, no failures, no errors. And if you were to look at the details, we can see that Firefox ran fine, no problem. It was being driven through Marionette. And we can see here for our Chrome side of things, everything worked, again, as expected. If you have any questions or comments, you can reach out to us on Twitter @CloudBees. If this video was helpful to you, give us a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to CloudBees TV yet, why not? Take a moment, click on that subscribe button, and then ring that bell, and you'll be notified anytime there's new content available on CloudBees TV. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next video.